All right, hello, welcome. We are back from the Holodeck for a final Lower Decks edition where we'll be breaking down and discussing the series finale, episode 10 of the fifth and final season of Star Trek Lower Decks, titled The New Next Generation. And I will say this is one of the most satisfying conclusions to pretty much any Star Trek series. Not to say that there have not been far better series finales and just great series finales across the board. I will say this one had a very unique feel to it. It felt like, yes, this is an end, but there's so much more to come, while also setting up some very big universal possibilities. So we have a lot to discuss, David. A lot of things to break down and get into. Thoughts and feelings. I'm sure there are various Star Trek fans out there that are not incredibly happy with certain things overall, but when it comes to...
please everybody.
You can't, David. But I will say, when it comes to actual story, the story itself that Mike McMahon put together this season, as well as this series finale, were very solid. It's top-notch Star Trek writing in a very simplistic, fun form. David, what are your initial thoughts on this series finale?
I was actually pleasantly surprised. Much like you, this entire season has been kind of bittersweet for everybody, because we're going, well, we're seeing the final season of Lower Decks, because we know that they didn't get any extension for a new season. But in a lot of ways, that unique feeling that you mentioned about this finale is interesting, because it's like it did still feel bittersweet getting to the end, but there was a satisfying feeling that basically we got to see these characters come to full development.
It was the most upbeat series finale.
Yeah. I mean, even more so than I would argue that even more so than Picard was season 3, because season 3 Picard is filled with nostalgia. Yeah, we got to see the final crew and everything else, but in a lot of ways, they really didn't really advance a lot as characters.
You're talking about Picard?
Yeah, in Picard, because they're still the TNG crew.
It advanced the immediate character storylines for the most part, but it neglected the universal.
Yeah.
What's going on in the universe right now? Well, we don't know, because for the most part, Star Trek Picard was very closed. It was a very closed narrative. It only dealt with the immediate surroundings, despite the fact that it dealt with assimilation and the Borg. For the most part, we were just confined to the Enterprise crew.
Yes.
Or the Titan crew.
The Titan crew. And then when you get to Lower Decks, yeah, the main focus, the main central focus of the entire season up to this point has been the Lower Decks crew. But in a lot of ways, Mike McMahon also did not forget that he can do fun things with the universe and set new precedents for future writers to take up the mantle.
I think that's the big takeaway when you're looking at a writer like Mike McMahon. Despite some of the problems that we have with him from time to time, overall he's very capable at writing Star Trek, at least the fun episodes, it seems, through Lower Decks. It remains to be seen whether or not he can tackle live action, but I don't doubt that he has the ability to do so. But what he did with Lower Decks, the actual writing of it, is very solid, because it's dealing with the more intimate aspects of the story. It's dealing with Lower Decks in itself.
Yeah.
Like it should, like all shows should. But also it expanded and reached further to not only bring the character story to an end, or at least this chapter in their life to an end.
Yeah.
It also opened the doorway for so much possibility in a universal sense. Like, what's possible in the world of Star Trek?
Exactly.
Well, by the end, it literally, through the metaphor of the gateway, the possibilities are now endless.
Yeah, it's like it is very much like the famous most quoted line in Wrath of Khan with that monologue in the very end where Kirk tells the eulogy of Spock. It says, Spock told me about possibilities.
Yeah. Oh.
That's what it's all. That's what I really get the vibe of in the very end. In a weird sort of way, that entire ending, which is very memorable. One of my favorite moments in Star Trek history is like the end of Wrath of Khan, and when Kirk makes the eulogy and talks about possibilities and how life never ends. It's just another chapter. It's another beginning. I got the same vibe from this in Lower Decks. I mean, like a little animated show that a lot of people were like saying, "Oh, you can't take it seriously. We can't take seriously on with the canon." But I'm like going, at the end of the day, we kind of can. When you look at the series, it seems ridiculous.
Yeah, and I will say, David, that your connection to, Kirk's eulogy for Spock, yeah, certainly. I think the reason why you can draw those connections is because Mike McMahon understands the embodiment or the philosophy of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And when you understand the philosophy of Star Trek, you can make things just feel right. Things fall into place, even if you're not trying to force puzzle pieces, to create a particular picture. If you understand the rules of the game, the puzzle pieces will find their proper places.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's amazing. What I've seen Mike McMahon do this particular season is like the ability to all of a sudden not only understand Star Trek, but also in a lot of ways, the way he's written this particular season, he seems to understand how fans think. Like every time it's interesting when I think about it, when me and you have covered each episode of Lower Decks, we constantly feel, there's always that moment where we constantly feel that Mike McMahon knows what we're thinking. There have been times when me and you have said, wow, what we said in the last episode, they follow up on.
Yeah.
Because it feels like Mike McMahon knows his audience.
Right.
And it's like, that is something that I think not a lot of like the other Star Trek series do know. I mean, it's like the greatest example of like a showrunner that does not know his audience is Shaban. He did not know his fucking audience.
He didn't know Star Trek.
He didn't know Star Trek.
Yeah.
But like then you go to say like Matalis, he understands his fan base, he understands the Star Trek, and it makes it work.
Yeah. Well, that's what it really comes down to, right? Hiring the right people.
Hiring the right people.
You need to hire the right people. And it seems like Kurtzman has leaned into that finally, that idea of hiring the right people, because as I've said numerous times now for the last couple of years, it does feel like we're on the right track. Now, for those people, David, who are not particularly happy with the Kurtzman era for whatever reason, because they feel like they're disregarding canon, they're throwing things out the window, which I don't necessarily agree with that. I think with every era of Star Trek, there are retcons. I mean, let's not forget the Trills were retconned from Next Generation to Deep Space Nine.
Yes, they were.
Klingons have been retconned, their appearances continually. That's why I never got mad with what Discovery did with their Klingons. Why they look so different. I'm like, well, this is just what they do. Unfortunately, I'm not a fan of it, but this is what they do. They change the species as the years go by. However, it was a decision, meaning Discovery and their Klingons, it was a decision that many fans just could not get behind because of their amphibian/reptilian look. Mm-hmm. It changed the very aesthetic of the Klingon. But David, that seems to be okay, because if we are to believe what Star Trek Lower Decks implied in this finale, Star Trek Discovery and its spinoffs have been officially confirmed as being not a part of the Prime timeline.
Yeah, they're their own universe.
And the only thing that we can draw on, I know there's been headcanon from fans since day one, saying this isn't canon, this is Kurtzman's timeline, this is a different timeline, this isn't Prime. And those have been just fans' own way to deal with changes.
Yes.
Okay. Canon is defined and decided by the people who run the IP. Unfortunately, that's just how it is.
That's how it is.
But in the episode, they explained that the quantum explosion created something called the Schrödinger possibility field. And the S field, for short, what it does when it makes contact with phenomenon, it essentially remaps matter into other possibilities from the multiverse. So during the very opening minutes of Lower Decks, I want to say 2 minutes and 26 seconds is the exact running time, so that if you missed it out there, listeners, you can go back and reference what I'm talking about. A Klingon on board a ship is hit by the S field, and he turns into a Discovery-era Klingon,
Yes.
completely changing his appearance. So what does that suggest? That suggests that Discovery is, in fact, not in the Prime universe. It is not in the same reality as all of our Rick Berman-era Star Trek, nor our Roddenberry-era Star Trek, because the original series, as well as the TNG time, is all one canon, all one timeline. So now, essentially, David, we have 3 timelines that are confirmed, that are a part of our everyday series. Kelvin timeline, which is connected to our current movies. We have the Prime timeline, which is the original series era, as well as the Next Generation era. And now we have the Discovery. We don't even have a name for it yet. Let's just call it the Discovery or Kurtzman timeline.
Yeah.
And that's Discovery and its spinoffs. Whether or not Picard is in Prime timeline or Discovery timeline remains to be seen. However, I think we could just assume that Worf's appearance as a regular Klingon that we're used to would suggest that it is in fact in the Prime universe.
And that's what I love about this whole idea that Mike McMahon has put forth. And as funny as it sounds, he's kind of toyed with it throughout the entire season about like dealing with the rifts and dealing with all the possibilities that are just a microcosm of like difference between us, right? But like coming full circle and basically explaining this Schrodinger wave, which for fans of science, the idea of Schrodinger's cat, the experiment of the whole thing, and then turning the whole quantum science behind it into a Star Trek thing is freaking awesome.
It is cool.
Because like the whole experiment, if for those out there who don't know what Schrodinger's cats is, it's an absurd science test to actually prove something that's observable. And it's kind of to prove if you see it, then it exists type thing. And basically the whole point is to show that anything is possible. It's one of those really quirky science tests that they teach in school.
Yeah.
And like bringing it here in Schrodinger's what did he call it? The Schrodinger wave?
The S field.
The S field. And I'm like going, essentially, Mike McMahon is telling a lot of things. Not only is he like trying to actually put forth his idea that any reality is possible. So like just like we said, Discovery can be in its own universe. Strange New Worlds can be on its own universe. Prodigy can be in its own universe. Everything is possible.
We need to simmer down with that.
And
yeah, David, don't be so happy about that because that's not a good thing either. That's my next point here. So does it solve problems? It solves lazy writing and lack of foresight. Yes, it does.
It does. It does open up
what
that.
Mike McMahon did is, I'm assuming this is him doing this on his own. And obviously he probably had to float this idea to the Star Trek gods because this is canon.
Yeah.
So Mike McMahon essentially fixed the mistakes of the Kurtzman era by suggesting that all these things can happen without messing up what we have seen and what has come before.
Yeah.
What he's now asserting is that we have so many different possibilities and multiverses that we don't even know what we're watching. And meaning is Section 31, in fact, in Prime timeline? Is it in Discovery's timeline? It creates a lot of questions. Now, the only people who are going to really be stressing out about this are the people who are in the know. I don't believe this will be a major reveal in a series at the moment. I don't think there's plans to say or distinguish Discovery from TNG. However, the fans that are in the know are also the same fans who have problems.
Yes.
So for us, these problems have been resolved.
Yeah.
For a lack of better words, it's been resolved. And in doing so, they introduce a very new aspect of Star Trek, which rather than seeking out strange new worlds and new civilizations, it seems like there's a new mission that's being set in place, which is to explore strange new universes
And realities.
and realities. That idea is very cool. One second. That idea is very cool. However, the idea of positioning Starbase 80, which is essentially a stand-in for Deep Space Nine,
Deep Space Nine.
and rather than having a Deep Space Nine space station orbiting very close to a wormhole, you now have Starbase 80 and its old technology that renders it unaffected
Well, it's the best
by
fitted.
the S field.
Yes.
By the S field effect, so that it's now stationed right outside this permanently open quantum portal
Yes.
that allows people to access arbitrarily the multiverse,
Yes.
and it's permanent. Is that cool? Yes. Is it a cool way to end a series? Yeah. But we have to remember, like we discussed during our last discussion, Mike McMahon is capable. But how many other writers now are just going to use this?
There you go.
Either A, to just give us nostalgia trips into the past. Oh, you remember this character? He died? Well, guess what? He's not dead anymore.
Member berries.
I feel like it's a loophole to being lazy, ununique, and derivative. Just, hey, let's not come up with new ideas. We have a reason built into Star Trek that we can continually regurgitate the past.
That is one of the issues that basically I 100% agree with you, is because it really does come down to Kurtzman and anyone up top who is part of the Star Trek gods of creativity up there. They have to literally become super gatekeepers now.
Well, what about, yes, because quality control. If you don't have to behold yourself to canon in your mind, if a writer thinks, well, we have this multiverse thing now, so we can just say this is a different timeline and we don't need to adhere to anything from the past.
And I hate to say it, that is like that is a very common mentality I see in a lot of writers today. Because like if it's there, they'll use it just to cover up their own mistakes.
Yeah. And that's my only that's really my only problem with the way the series ended.
Mm-hmm.
Not because Lower Decks did anything wrong. It's because I know that there'll be other hacky writers who will either fix their bad writing problems with the multiverse idea or just throw out all accountability and say, well, now we can just write what we want, guys. We don't have to worry about understanding Star Trek, understanding what came before. And that becomes a mistake for a couple reasons. But there's a caveat, David, so bear with me for a second.
Okay.
So it creates lots of problems because Star Trek is literally a mythologized history.
Yes.
Star Trek is built on history. It's built on our history. It's built on its own history. And that history, both theirs and ours, is what builds the series.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a multiversal gate and you're not beholden to history, can Star Trek still be the same thing? I don't think it can be. The way Star Trek forms its narratives is by looking back.
Mm-hmm.
It looks back on itself, on society. It's meta in that regard. And when you remove the ability to look back on itself, then Star Trek ceases to function the way it's supposed to function.
Yes. And like when you think about it, it's like the thing I was gonna bring up is like this is the similar problems that a lot of people, especially in Star Trek, have when they start toying around with time travel. Time travel. It's one of the biggest, or one of the many reasons I particularly do not like using time travel in a story, because it just opens you up to too many bad writing choices.
Yeah.
And like that's the reason why I'm like going, it was one thing that I was really concerned with, is not the fate of the future of the Lower Decks crew, mind you, but the fate and the future of actual Star Trek stories from here on after.
Yeah.
Because they did introduce a huge element. Because, like, yeah, if space is no longer a mission, a grandiose mission that the Federation now does, instead it dives headlong into this mission of realities and possibilities. I'm like you. I'm like going. I guess what I'm getting to is like I don't have faith in humanity.
Yeah.
Because I don't have faith in like future writers because I'm like going. I've seen too much bad writing to know that basically there's too many bad writers out there and not a lot of good writers. And that's the thing that I'm like going. That's why I mentioned about the gatekeeping, because I know a lot of people feel that, oh, don't gatekeep. You can't gatekeep people.
What do you mean gatekeep?
You know, gatekeep when it basically
I know what you mean.
When we decide on like writers for any, they should basically really be elitist.
They should.
And yeah.
Now,
media have always said they should.
Gatekeeping in my mind is when we say gatekeeping, I think of fans shouldn't gatekeep. Meaning fans should celebrate what they want from Star Trek. If you like to ship, okay. If you like the LGBT stuff that you see in Star Trek,
sweet.
Okay. If you like the philosophy in Star Trek, if that's what you really like, then okay. The gatekeeping, when I use it, usually refers to them, to people, to us. We shouldn't gatekeep. We should allow people to enjoy the series as they want. But the fucking writers should be gatekeeping.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are beholden or given the responsibility to protect continuity and canon.
They are the guardians of forever, Mike.
They literally are. And then they told us you can't change the past. I knew, David, that comment was going to come back and haunt us. And it did.
Was.
Because even though it's such a great aspect in Star Trek Discovery, when they said you can't change the past, well, what does that say about all the other times Star Trek shows have gone into the past? Well, then what they're doing is they're just creating a new timeline. They're not actually fixing their time. So there's some universe that the probe from Star Trek 4 destroyed Earth.
Yeah.
Because when Kirk went back in time, he didn't save his universe. He created a split.
Yeah.
And he saved another version of Earth. A new timeline was created.
And to Kirk, yeah, he's going to live in that new timeline because that's what he did.
Yeah, but poor Admiral Cartwright was left dead.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that basically I cracked up at when I think about it, because it's like, I'm like going, okay, so the only cool part about the idea of this, Mike, it brings it back to basically what me and you have always felt since the beginning we started the show about the things that govern Star Trek as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that sense of determinism that basically that there are certain things that have to happen regardless of where or how it happens. It still ends up in that position. Like Kirk and Spock still have to become friends. They still have to become, captain or partners to save the day. And or like Janeway and her crew have to be lost out in the Alpha Quadrant because Voyager has to make that journey from the Alpha Quadrant all the way back because of how much they learned.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like now when I think about that, when the Guardian of Forever says you cannot change the past, it makes me really think like, oh my God. So like, just like you said, Kirk goes back in time. Yeah, he does, but to him, he thinks he changed the past. But in actuality, he didn't. He just created another
same thing
universe.
with old Pike from Strange New Worlds. Same thing with old Janeway. They didn't actually save their timelines.
Change their timeline.
Yeah. So that's why I had a problem with that. It was cool, but also, so essentially we have tons of different timelines then. If you really start breaking down, this is why Mike McMahon probably brought into canon this idea of the multiverse. He's the first Star Trek writer, which is so fucking funny that it happens to be in a cartoon, that actually takes the concept of the multiverse, which is a different version, which is, we're going to have to do a show where we break all of it down because dimensions, alternate realities, split timelines, they're all different. but
Yeah.
Star Trek uses them interchangeably. And they brought all of that under in order to fix it through this multiverse concept now.
Yeah.
So Mike McMahon, once again, his real job is janitor. I mean, that's his real job. He's just
Oh my God, you're right.
He's a janitor.
Yeah, he was the janitor.
So what do you do? You work for Star Trek? You're a writer? Like, kinda, but mostly I sweep up shit.
I sweep up shit.
Consider me a janitor.
And I organize the shit into certain piles.
Yeah. So Mike McMahon is just kind of reorganizing and fixing concepts under one term that could theoretically justify the other umbrella terms.
It makes me wonder, Mike McMahon was the only writer up to this point in Star Trek to actually take this route. It makes me wonder, why wouldn't any other writer decide to go this route?
Well, David, we answered that at the very beginning of the show. Mike McMahon kind of gets it, right?
He gets it.
Now, you brought up determinism, and that is something we've talked about now for I don't know how many years, David.
Oh my God, yeah.
Over since the show started.
Almost the basis of our show, Mike.
Yeah, and because we are obsessed with alt timelines. We love the mirror universe at one point. Now we kind of got tired of it after 10 years, but we were always talking about the multiverse and what it meant. Is it determinism? Is there free will? How is it governed? Well, again, Mike McMahon kind of gives us an answer. He literally uses the words fate or entanglement.
Yes.
Okay, now if you break those down, fate, we pretty much understand how fate is traditionally used in philosophical contexts. It's seen as a predetermined course of events, right?
Yeah.
Very simple. Entanglement is slightly different. It suggests, but also, David, this works specifically with what we discuss continually in our shows. It suggests a form of interconnection, whether through relationships, choices, or existential threads. Philosophically, entanglement might be viewed as the web of causality or interconnectedness that binds individuals and events.
Yes.
So whatever perspective you want to take, fate or entanglement, as Ransom said, I believe he was the character that said it.
Yeah. Funny that it comes from Ransom.
Once again, we're getting explanations. If you start really listening to the show itself rather than paying attention to just the funny stuff, Mike McMahon is doing some hard fucking lifting here.
Oh, yeah.
So overall, David, when it comes to the universal things, they're great. When it comes to the story itself, let's get into that now. And our characters, seeing our characters come full circle. Mariner, I think, is a success story at this point.
Yes.
She starts completely at one end of the spectrum, like a character should, and ends up on the other side. That's how you write characters.
Yes.
That's literally the epitome of character development.
And you notice, Mike, they did this with Mariner, and if me and you have done so many shows throughout the year that we look at the way they built Mariner, and it amazes me. And this goes back to like what I said earlier, is me not having enough faith in new writers nowadays.
Yeah.
Mike McMahon makes it look so freaking easy to do a story arc where you can actually show a character's beginning and ending point.
Yeah.
It's like, it boggles my mind. I'm like going, why can't other writers do this?
Yeah. David, because Chuck says it in Supernatural season 4. Writing is hard. One of the best lines ever.
It is. Oh my God. I forgot about that.
Writing is hard.
Writing is hard.
It is, David. We give writers shit, but writing is hard. Now pretend writing is hard, right? Now also pretend you have fucking studio execs breathing down your neck. It becomes that much harder. So to be fair, or I should say, David, despite what people may think of us, we can be fair. We understand there are situations that may affect your writing, but then you have people like Mike McMahon and Metalis that know how to swim those shark-infested waters.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's another skill set, Dave. It's an entirely different skill set, and not all writers have it. If you're a writer, you have a very specific type of mindset. You're an artist. You're a craftsman.
Oh, yeah.
You're not thinking from the business side. So it takes a very specific type of person that can walk both worlds, the craft or the artistic side, as well as the business, the professional side.
But like the amazing thing too, in what Mike McMahon was able to do, he gave us like this basic story arc of Mariner. But did you notice that he didn't forget his other characters? Like all the other characters experience character growth, but they're all done in unique ways.
Yeah, our core characters all had major developments. It started at one point and ended on the other. So all of them are good. Not going to say anything bad about any of them. In fact, I even like what he did with Rutherford because
Dude, yeah.
it goes back to another Star Trek theory that I've written about for quite some time now. And it's the idea that what really makes the human in Star Trek, because we have to remember Star Trek's always about the human.
Yeah.
Even when we're dealing with aliens, it's just a way to displace the human. It's a metaphor or an allegory for humanity. So there's an idea in Star Trek that's always been there. And it's this idea that you always need the combination of human and technology in order to make the right human, in order to make the right decisions, in order for humanity to get to its rightful place amongst the universe, the stars, society, civilization, however you want to look at it or phrase it. There has to be this acceptance of the human and embracing the emotion while also having a significant amount of respect, a balanced respect for technology.
Yes.
And when Rutherford couldn't solve problems and he realized it was because he was relying too much on technology, it wasn't until he embraced his humanity in combination with technology was he able to solve the problem.
Yeah.
We see this in Star Trek all the time. It's one of those very subtle narrative aspects. And the fact that Mike McMahon took one of those core aspects, it proves yet again the dude knows Star Trek and all of its various levels.
Yeah. And I love the fact that how Rutherford's story isn't about how technology is bad, because usually stories like that say technology is evil. No, technology isn't bad. Rutherford just basically was relying on it too much.
Well, that's the thing. Remembering that Star Trek is built on Roddenberry's belief of humanist philosophy. Humanist philosophy believes in embracing the human emotion, but also having a respect and an acceptance of technology.
Yes.
That's literally built into humanist philosophy. So the fact that he's using that
is amazing, isn't it?
Dude, it makes it so much better.
Yeah.
It really does. And that's something that I will miss now that this series is over, despite some of my problems with its silliness, because it's just not my thing. Not because it's not good. It's because I prefer my Star Trek more serious. But when you look at the series as a whole, specifically this episode, and you strip away the silliness, there's a very real Star Trek story.
It is. And I mean, even down to Boimler's story. Boimler's might be ridiculous, and basically his beard has reached maximum growth. His beard has reached maximum growth. This is what his story has been all based off. But in actuality, to take his story and basically tie it to what we mentioned earlier about determinism, where it's like, where he realizes that, he's been using this pad to kind of to mimic that Boimler. But then he comes to realize that I could still make my own decisions.
Yep.
I don't have to live and die by this pad.
So, David, that's a rejection of fate.
Yes.
With the embracement of freedom by throwing out what you view as deterministic. So there's also a refutation or a refuting of the deterministic as well.
Yeah.
So there's this
combination where it's kind of like
it's really good.
It's juggled so well because, like, if you think about it, Mike McMahon was able to actually put forth one idea and then the other idea without either of them like contradicting each other.
Right.
Because you can be deterministic, but you can also still have the freedom to make your own choice.
And I'm wondering then if the Star Trek world is not as deterministic as we are alleging, and perhaps maybe it's soft determinism.
I think
soft determinism is very different than outright determinism. I'm a bit of a soft determinist. If someone were to ask me, do I believe in free will? I would say yes to a degree, but I also believe in soft determinism, meaning our choices are limited.
Our choices are limited to some degree.
And then you can throw in correlation in there as well, because a lot of people don't understand the difference between causality and correlation. Correlation is also another factor. So, yeah. That's why I really like this episode, because it was working on so many different Star Trek levels and bringing all of it together and wrapping them neatly with a bow, innervating them together, making them work. There wasn't just one philosophy. There was various Star Trek philosophies that we have been privy to over the last 50 plus years that he's using to craft this finale.
And the amazing part is like, think about it, Mike. One of the things that basically we've kind of turned into kind of a negative when looking at shows is when a showrunner or writer decides to do a project with a multiple cast, an ensemble, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have Mike McMahon, who we just talked about 3 of the cast. Don't forget that basically there was Tindy, there's Talin, there's the bridge crew. He was able to do all of them.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, that is one heck of a juggling act. That is like that deserves an applause, like a standing ovation for that type of juggling that he was doing this season.
Because you have Tindy and Rutherford. We've been talking about this for years now, that they are essentially in love.
Yes.
But they haven't quite understood that, or at least they're not willing to accept it quite yet. However, by the end of the episode, it is very clearly stated for the first time
Yes.
that they are, in fact, in love with each other, but they still don't quite understand that that's what they feel for each other,
Because they're two socially awkward people.
Yes. Then we have Talin. Her story also came to an end. I'm really not quite sure what her overarching story was. I think she became more of a supporting cast for Mariner, Boimler, Tendi, and
Especially
Rutherford.
Tindy.
Yeah. So I don't think she had a beginning and end. I mean, you could say a little bit. You can point to when she was introduced, the ending of season 3, I believe, is when she was introduced.
Yeah.
So you could say there was an arc there, yes, but she also wasn't the focus because she was thrown in after the fact as a way, or I should say as a, I don't want to say an unknown variable, but a variable that could be used and paired with any one of our characters. So she was an assistant type of character that was brought in to help smooth out particular story arcs and introduce new elements. Plus, you can't have a Star Trek series without some logic. So you brought that in. Then you had Shax and T'Ana, their story come to an end. I fucking loved when Ransom said, I know Captain Freeman said you can never blow eject the warp core.
Eject the
Is that
warp
what it
core?
was? I mean, it was, I don't want to say perfect, but it was such a great series finale. Also, Ransom becoming captain.
And getting his time to say the line.
Yeah, engage the core. Of course, it's a workout metaphor.
Yeah.
Of course.
Mike, I want to be honest. When he said that, I'm like going, why is it that I picture Mike coming up with that? Engage the core.
Listen, not all workout people are douches, okay?
But I have to, I was like cracking up and going, Ransom? Yeah. Ransom, that makes so much sense.
I will say engage the core is 1,000 times better than let's fly. It's the worst.
See, so it's better. It's better.
No, engage the core at least fits the show. It fits Ransom's sense of humor. It fits everything we know about him. And it's a clever way to play on the act of going into warp.
Yeah.
It's a play on words. It works. Let's Fly was the most
even if you saying it basically makes me crack up.
It's just so stupid. And I love Discovery, but
I love Discovery.
I think that is probably the worst thing in Star Trek Discovery. And I know that's saying a lot because there are some questionable things in the first season and a half or so of Star Trek Discovery. But that whole Let's Fly thing just never worked. It felt so forced.
I actually have like a thing I always do when I watch Star Trek is like I try to imagine if I was a navigator and I heard my captain say his phrase and see how it makes me feel. Kirk, oh yeah, that's epic. Let's go. Picard, yeah, let's go. Janeway, Cisco, yeah, great, simple. You get to Let's Fly, and I'm like going.
The only captain that, let's just make it clear that the only captain that actually had a saying prior to Kurtzman era was Picard.
Was Picard?
He's the only one that had an actual saying.
But when you think about it, because a lot of Star Trek fans put it out there, I started thinking about it. Like, if I'm a navigator and I hear that, how does that make me feel? Let's Fly makes me cringe. And I'm sorry, if I hear engage the core, I'm like, I'd be like cracking up at the, gotta be going, whatever you say, Captain.
Let's Fly, and this is not a derogatory statement. Let's Fly sounds like some try-hard, transcendental Beyonce concert slogan.
It does.
Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
it feels,
it's a try-hard.
It's like, I'm a queen.
Yeah.
It's that, you know how Beyonce does that at concerts now? Like, she tries to pawn herself off, kind of like Oprah.
Yeah.
It's like, we're queens.
Where she poses as, I guess, like Jesus.
Yeah, and it's just this, it's just like this pseudo spiritual like bullshit. That's what Let's Fly sounded like to me, especially with how Burnham said it. Sonequa Martin Green, the way she said Let's Fly made it worse. It wasn't like Let's Fly. It was like,
let's fly.
Let's fly.
And also, I'm serious, Mike, put yourself in the navigator. Basically, you hear that behind you, and you're like,
see, David, I wouldn't say engage the core. I'd be like, let's fuck.
let's fuck. And then when I'm going,
DePaul shows up. Like, oh. Well, I heard you say let's fuck. I'm like, oh, I meant like, let's go into war.
Later in my captain's quarters.
Nah. In the ready room.
In the ready room.
It's more fun. You never know who might walk in and catch us. little suspense is a little exciting. So stupid. Another fun part of the episode was when Tendi and T'Lyn had their little fight.
Yeah.
And then when they became friends again, that was it like a Voltron anime sequence where they became besties again. They gave you that split screen. What's the name of it? I know you know the term, where the background moves fast in anime.
Yes. It's basically kind of like a, I can't think of it. Right,
you forgot, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do
right?
know what you're talking about.
So seeing that was fun. It felt a little out of place because we've never quite seen something like that in Star Trek, but it still worked in the sense that we were in the thick of it. We were in the thick of the action. And it did work, and it made me laugh. And I think at the end of the day, if something does feel out of place, but it makes you laugh in a show like this, as long as it's not canon breaking,
you're fine.
You're fine.
And the thing was, the vibe that I got from it too was kind of like similar to how the times in TNG when Data and Geordi worked together as a complete unit.
Yeah.
Where it's like, holy crap, they are the science team.
Yep.
That's the feeling I got when I got the T'Lyn and Tendi scene, because I'm like going, okay, this is like their final form. This is basically they've reached their apex and they are working as a unit now. And this isn't the lower decks that we remember from, season 1, season 2, and season 3, where it's very parallel to like how when they're sitting around the table as the lower decks crew, as goofy cadets, and then at that moment you see them, that basically how much it really emphasizes how much they're grown and how much they are to be taken seriously.
That's one thing I did notice. The series, though it has a comedic tinge to it, right? That's what it is. It's a comedy series. It does feel like they were pushing these characters, and I believe we talked about this and posed this question, like, how will this end? Will it end in a way where these characters can be easily brought into the live action? And I do feel like they can be. The way they ended it, it brought a maturity to the series.
Yeah.
It almost, I don't want to say ended the comedic, but because of their character growth as a crew, not just the Lower Decks 4, but our crew, the Cerritos crew, they have been through so much over the last 5 years, you do feel a sense of maturity for all of them, especially when Ransom promotes as provisional first officers both Boimler and Mariner. It feels like these characters are very real, viable characters that can be pushed into other Star Trek shows. I don't think anyone's going to scratch their head if we see Boimler someday in an episode of Star Trek, or Mariner, or Ransom, or even the Cerritos.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that basically that final scene really put into perspective in a sort of way.
It made them into a real Starfleet crew, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what it did.
Because like, and I like how it was dealt with. It wasn't like ham-fisted or anything,
No.
or melodramatic, you know. It was just almost like Mike McMahon treated it like matter of factly. It's like, hey, we've seen what these characters can do. Yeah, they deserve to be here. It's like kind of why I like how Ransom talked to Mariner and Boimler when Boimler and Mariner were like very hesitant, and Ransom's like, no, you guys are fine. You'll be able to lead this new lower decks crew. That's what makes you two good.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, yeah, we should actually be at this point. It's almost like Mike McMahon and his writing staff saying, these characters are viable. Go use them if you dare.
Yep. David, well, that does bring us to the end of our discussion. I just want to say that I enjoyed Lower Decks as a whole. I had my problems throughout. Nothing that are deal breakers, just my typical miserableness. I don't like humor.
You don't like humor?
I like my Star Trek serious. So, when they veered too far off the deep end with comedy, I had my problems. But overall, the series, I feel, is a success. I don't have a problem with this being forever a part of the Star Trek legacy. It'll be a series that fans go back to time and time again. And it did a lot for Star Trek. Yes, it parodied and it was very satirical at times, but it also had its own mythology, its own story, its own unique characters. And in doing so, it became a real Star Trek series, despite it being within the animation medium. I will give this series finale a 97%. What about you, David?
I'm actually right there with you. I'm going to give this series finale a 97 as well. I think it was really strong with all of the things, our hesitancies this entire season. I'm now coming to terms with the fact that a lot of my hesitancy was just because Lower Decks is such a unique Star Trek series because it's something we have never seen before.
Right.
And Mike McMahon is just trying to do something different, and it might not feel like a Star Trek series at first for hardcore Star Trek fans like me and you, but in the end, it's amazing to me that he's still willing to stick to the core tenets of what makes a Star Trek series, even if he's going to try to do something unique with it. One of the biggest things this season was kind of like, for me, was like, I have no idea what your direction's going for. I mean, how long were we saying throughout the season that basically we don't know what the core central story arc is? There's no like.
Well, this is the weakest season. Overall, this is the weakest. I would stick to that.
But like, for some strange reason,
but it ended strong.
It ended really strongly, and I'm like going. Normally, when we're like that, a series will be graded very poorly.
Yeah.
But here, I'm like going, no, I can't give Lower Decks a poor grade because I would still go back and watch this season. Like,
oh, yeah, of course.
It was still very enjoyable. And just like what you said is like, I feel really excited and I want to see these characters now, even in a live action version. If they were to actually continue the crew of the Cerritos or continue the story of the crew of the Cerritos, and we get to actually see them in live action, I think that'd be really awesome. Especially, like, I don't know why I want to see Captain Ransom in live action.
Well, he's also the actor that plays Ransom is also a legit live action actor.
Exactly. And I'm like going, that would be so awesome to now. I definitely think that it'd be still a comedy because there's no way you could take Captain Ransom seriously. there's just no.
I think you can. I feel like they could give him a bit of a douche veneer, and that could bring the comedy. I think if you're careful with how you choose to bring the comedy out, then yes, I think a character like Ransom could work in a non-comedic live action. And you can still stay true to who he is.
And also, this makes me really excited for what Tommy Newsom can do. we've been wondering, okay, what is Tanya Newsom going to do after Lower Decks? She's going to be tied to Starfleet Academy. If she can bring this
No,
type
not
of
Starfleet Academy.
or not Starfleet,
She's doing a separate series that
Yeah.
hasn't been. We haven't been told what the name of the
if
series is.
whatever series it is, if she can bring the same energy she has from Lower Decks, I think we're in store for a really cool Star Trek series. So overall, as a season finale, I'm with you, 97. And definitely the whole season as a whole is still rewatchable.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening and sticking with us. I can't find the right words today, so
You can't find engage the core.
thank you, everyone, for being patient with us, listening to us complain, rant, go off topic.
Yeah.
All right, David, thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.